for our children. It is the right thing to do to speak up for our children. It is the right thing to do to fight for our children. Because if we don't fight for our children, we can't expect nobody else to fight for our children like us. And we have to fight for our children until hell freezes over. And then we have to be prepared to fight on the ice. Because our children need to know that's how much we believe in them. That's how much we believe in their future. Because they too have a right to life and liberty and the American dream. And that is the plea for justice. Thank you. God bless you. Katie and Aubrey, as I prepare to have reflections and bring you all up to reflect on the blessing that God gave you to bring into this world, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge the family of Jamar Clark, who came here to be with you all. Yeah, the Wright family is a beautiful, modern American family. Beautiful in every way, diverse, lovable, just a representative of America, Reverend Al, when you look at them. So if you all will give the charity of your undivided attention to the parents of Daunte Wright as they come to give reflections. His mother, Katie Wright, and his father, Aubrey Wright. Show your love for this loving family.
I sat up until 3:30 in the morning, so nervous and scared about what I was going to stand up here and say about my son. I never imagined that I'd be standing here. The roles should completely be reversed. My son should be burying me. Oh, my son had a smile that was worth $1 million. When he walked in the room, he lit up the room. He was a brother, a jokester. He was loved by so many. He's going to be so missed.
Take your time, Katie.
I don't really speak much, but words can't even explain how I feel right now. You know, that was my son. I'm going, man.
I remember when Dante first became a father. His son was born at 28 weeks along, so he was premature. And the joy that Junior brought to Dante's life was truly amazing. He was so happy and so proud, and he always said he couldn't wait to make his son proud. And Junior was the joy of his life, and he lived for him every single day. And now he's not going to be able to see him.
God bless you. Thank you so much. Yeah, as Reverend Al has often said, there's no instructions of how to join this fraternity. It is thrust upon you. At this time, we will have, as a brother, his siblings of Daunte Wright, Dallas, Demeek, Marcus, Monica, Diamond, and Destiny. If you all would come forward and give reflections as a brother. This beautiful American family. And your name?
My name is Monica Wright. I didn't really get enough time with him. I wish I got enough. I didn't get to tell him I loved him before he left. He didn't deserve this. He was so loved by everybody. Do y'all look around and see how big our family was? He had love from everybody.
Y'all, say your name.
My name is Dallas. I'm one of Dante's 3 older brothers, and we were pretty much closest out of the 2. I spent a lot of time with this man, and every holiday is not going to be the same anymore without him being here. He was literally the life of the party. When he came in, you know, the smile, his laugh was literally contagious. Anybody knows if you heard his laugh, and it's contagious. But I am gonna miss this man so much because he was literally my best friend through thick and thin, through all the late night conversations we had about him trying to better himself as a man and the man he wanted to be for Junior. We've talked for hours on it, and he was doing that, and I was so proud of the man that he was becoming, and he was gonna make an amazing father to Junior once Junior got older throughout the years, and I love my little brother to death. That's it.
You all give a big round of applause for this beautiful American family. Attorney Ramanucci, as his Aunt Nisha said, everybody talked about that big smile he had. That big smile. And how he lighted up the room. Next, you will hear from his uncle, Bobby Wright, the uncle of Daunte Wright. Is he coming along, Nisha, or is somebody coming with him? Okay. Okay. Y'all give it up for Uncle Bobby. Oscar Grant had an Uncle Bobby as well. Something about those Uncle Bobbies. Yes, sir.
It's funny that you say Bobby Wright. It's Bobby McGee, but I was raised by the Wright family. My father's Bobby Wright, Sr., and it's a lot of Bobbies. So, but I just want to say, Dante was amazing. From the first day I met him, he was a little bitty boy. My sister gave him this nickname, Lemon Head. And he would not stop laughing. He wouldn't stop giggling. That smile, that laugh was there from day one. And he drooled when he was a baby, nonstop. So he just couldn't stop laughing all the time. So he just brightened the room. And I tell you, it's not going to be the same without him. I'm just so thankful that I had the opportunity to spend my last birthday with him. And I wish I could tell you that I was spending his birthday with him. But we won't have that opportunity. This is just a travesty, and we just got to do better as people. We can't keep being pulled away from our families. Thank you. I actually wrote something for him, but with all this going on, I just don't know if I can do that part, but I love you. I love you, Dante, and we will see you again.
Next, we will have a musical selection, and then I will introduce the eulogist who really needs no introduction, but it would be disrespectful not to give him his propers. Now we'll have the musical selection. My Lord. Y'all, thank Bishop Howell and his incredible choir from Shiloh Temple International Ministries. Bishop Howell, thank you for having your great choir here so all of America could take in the fullness of the black church experience. So when those who don't attend a black church, when they go to their church on Sunday, they can reflect back to the black church experience. Thank you, Bishop Howell. Amen. Now has come the time when we pay the highest respects to DAUNTE WRIGHT with the eulogy. And there is nobody more fitting than our civil rights leader in America. Every time I call him, he always answers the bell. He answered the bell for Martin Lee Anderson in 2006. He answered the bell for Trayvon Martin in 2012, Oscar Grant in 2009. He answered the bell for every name we have come to learn in the last 3 decades of black people who have been disenfranchised, victimized, and marginalized. And he answers the call in the middle of the night. He answers the call in the middle of the night, the wee hours of the morning. Even when he's doing his television show, Politics Nation, he will text you back because that's how much he cares about black America and those who have been forgotten about, left behind, swept under the rug. He always is there, standing in the gap, giving a voice to the voiceless. My mentor, my friend, he's a co-counsel when we need him, Kaden Arbery, and he is the man who God has anointed for a time such as this, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Giving honor to God, to our pastor, give a big hand to Bishop Howell. To my brother Aubrey and sister Katie, and to the whole family. And to those that have sat in that seat, families that are here that have sat in that seat know better than any of us how they feel. I don't care how much settlement they may be given. You can never fill the hole in their heart that was caused for no reason. And that is why they're here. Give those mothers, fathers, and uncles of victims that come today a big hand. In the tradition of the black church, we take a text and a subject, and I didn't want to disrespect Bishop. So I went to the book of Isaiah. Today they tell me this is Grandma's birthday. I'm a little older than her, so I got to wear my reading glasses. Book of Isaiah, 59th chapter, 8th and the 9th verse says, the way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. Therefore is judgment far from us, neither doth justice overtake us. I want to use for a subject, no justice, no peace. (1986) in a section of Brooklyn called Howard Beach, a young man named Michael Griffith was killed because they said that they didn't allow blacks in the neighborhood. Some of us went out and marched, and during the march, one brother yelled, I believe his name was Amawali, no justice, no peace. And it became the chant of our movement. Some of us have made it popular, but it started there. But it really started in the Bible. Because Isaiah said that those that practice injustice cannot practice peace. The absence of justice is the absence of peace. And when we say that, we're not talking about violence, because there is a confusion in this country between peace and quiet. Some of us are told to shut up and just be quiet. And you call that peace, but peace is the presence of justice. You can't tell us to shut up and suffer. We must speak up when there is an injustice. I remember as I was riding here and I saw someone, and as I got out the car to meet the family to ride to the church, heard a man say, I've not seen a funeral procession like this since Prince in Minneapolis. I said, well, we came to bury the Prince of Brooklyn Center. We come from all over the country because you hurt one of our princes. That's why we're in this temple with purple all over, because it represents royalty. You thought he was just some kid with air freshener. He was a prince. And all of Minneapolis has stopped today to honor the Prince of Brooklyn Center. If you knew who we were, if you understood that we were divine decisions that God made, if you understood that his mother and father broke the racial barrier lines and raised him in an interracial home that used to be against the law, but they defied the color barriers, a black man and a white woman, and raised children to not hate nobody. And he was a prince of that raising. If you knew who he was, you have been caught with mistaken identity. You keep thinking that we are somebody we're not. They tell our young folks to don't go to the streets and march, when marching and protesting is a way of correcting the injustice Isaiah talked about. You can't go to church on Sunday and read this book that we call the Bible and not fight against oppression. God is not on the side of the oppressor. God is on the side of the oppressed. For every Pharaoh, there was a Moses. For every Nebuchadnezzar, there was a Daniel. For every Belshazzar, there were 3 Hebrew boys. For every Herod, there was a Jesus. We come in the tradition of what God's plans was, and when you oppress us, we must stand up. That's why we're here. 11 months ago, we stood for George Floyd. And as the trial wound down and the jury was about to get the verdict, and the reason we got the jury we got and the verdict we got is God used a young brother born and raised as a Muslim, but believing in the same God. It don't matter how you approach God. And elected him even after you tried to scandalize him. The Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. God doesn't use folk without letting you test them. Everybody that God calls, he lets you baptize them in fire. They indicted Martin Luther King. It only got him ready for what he did. Every time you are under attack, you just getting ready because God wouldn't test you if he wasn't going to graduate you. And he was being tested and elected so that he was prepared to take the attacks when he stood up for George Floyd and was able for the first time in the history of the state of Minnesota to convict a white policeman for killing a black man, 2 murder convictions and 1 manslaughter conviction. God has turned the page in the state of Minnesota, and we're never going back no more. Yes, some of us have different tactics, but all of us have the same goal. Talk about some of y'all are civil rights, some of y'all are street activists. We all street activists, and we all civil rights. Some of us young, some of us old, but we all the same. They don't discriminate us because of age. And that's why when I talked to Brother Aubrey and told him that we'd be there for him, whatever he needs, because we see this young man as royalty. When Ben Crump called me the other night and told me that they were winding the trial down, you better come in. I had certain obligations and I had to fulfill them in New York, couldn't get here the way I wanted. I called one of my wealthy black friends. He said, I'll send you my plane. Some of them got on Twitter talking about why I'm on a private plane. Because I'm that kind of guy. When George Floyd was killed, Tyler Perry sent his private plane to bring the Floyd family to Minneapolis. Robert Smith sent a private plane to bring Eric Garner's mother and me into Minneapolis. We ain't in the back of the bus no more. I'd have taken an Apollo rocket if it was available. Every crisis must be answered, though, with real change. Yesterday, the Attorney General Garland announced in Montgomery against the segregation laws in Alabama, and they boycotted the bus company. 1955, they started December 1st, and for a solid year, they wouldn't ride the bus. They said it was better to walk in dignity than to ride in shame. And they broke the backs of Alabama's segregation. But Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy and Rosa Parks said, we can't stop there. We got to have federal law. And they went their way. Then some young students, the young folk of that day, they became freedom riders, and others did other things. And it took 9 years, and they got the Civil Rights Act federally that made it against federal law, Congresswoman Omar, to discriminate. Well, we've gone from all of these abuses, from Oscar Grant and Amadou Diallo and others, all the way to Philando Castile right here in Minneapolis area. We struggled through all of that, but we are going to now, in his name, in the name of Daunte, we're going to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act as federal law. We are going to make it against the law all over this country to keep bringing us to funerals for our young princes. This is not a Republican or Democratic thing. Isaiah said it's about justice. If you believe in justice, it's time for the federal government to reflect the will of the people. You couldn't have a better picture than to have two people that crossed the color line and raised children to be somebody, to stand up and embrace them. You couldn't have had a better example than the Floyd family that wiped tears from their eyes and stood up with dignity, even as they watched them smear their brother, their uncle, their father. We've always had to take the smearing, Keith Ellison, but behind every dark night, the sun will shine. I was talking to one of the relatives, and I said, well, what are they trying to justify? One said, well, they said they saw some air fresheners in the back of his car. Well, air fresheners is to keep the bad odors out. Well, we come today as the air fresheners for Minnesota. We're trying to get the stench of police brutality out of the atmosphere. We're trying to get the stench of racism out of the atmosphere. We're trying to get the stench of racial profiling out of the atmosphere. We come to Minnesota as air fresheners because your air is too odorous for us to breathe. We can't breathe in your stinking air no more. I know we got to get to the cemetery, but let me tell you this. The time has come for America to stand up and bring a new day to where we don't have to explain to our children what to do when the police stop you. It's time to bring a new day where we don't have to videotape when we see a badge, but where we know that they're there to serve and protect, not treat us like we've been convicted. The time has come for police to understand they're not above the law. They're to enforce the law. And if you can't live up to the badge, don't take the oath and put it on. When we put that badge on you, we expect you to act like somebody that is civilized and respectful. Some say, Reverend Al, Police are human. Well, we knew that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have sent you through training. But we assume when you come through that you were trained. Train people. Don't confuse guns from tasers. Train people. Don't shoot men like Philando with a child in the back seat. Train people. Don't put knees on people's necks for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Train people. Don't shoot 41 times at Amadou Diallo. Train people. Don't shoot at a young 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice. You broke your training. Now we gonna send you to the corner and you getting your punishment at the corner of the newest jail that we can find. So as we celebrate this young man's life, 20 years old, not even reaching his mid-20s, his mother and father heartbroken, his siblings heartbroken, but they will be comforted knowing that because of this sacrifice that is going to change the laws of the land, children unborn is going to know his name. Governors here, Congress people here, senators here for you, Dante, because you are the prince that made us all come together. They stopped traffic today all the way through Minneapolis. Folk couldn't drive nowhere because they had to say hail to the prince. They shouldn't have done what they done. We gonna stop Minneapolis today because a prince is on his way to his rest. And as you rest, there's a resting place. There's a martyr's bench. Take your seat, Dante. Tell George Floyd who you are. Take your seat, Dante. Shake hands with Philando Castile. Take your seat. Take your seat next to Oscar Grant, because there's a special place in heaven for those that shed innocent blood, because God will use you to straighten out the world. The world will never be the same because we're going to stand up for situations like this. We do not in any way condone or incite violence. People keep telling me, Reverend, why don't y'all tell people not to be violent? We always have. But when are you going to tell policemen to stop being violent? Problem is not us talking to our youth. The problem is you talking to your bad cops. Now, all cops are not bad. I saw 10 get on the stand the other day and testify against another policeman. That's why no change is here. When you see the blue wall of silence tumble in a courtroom in Minneapolis, when policemen understand that they are committed to the oath rather than to their colleague, that's when we know a breakthrough is coming. That's when we know we can pass the George Floyd bill, because folk are not going to lie on you no more. And next time you get ready to pull your gun, next time you get ready to bend your knee, put in your picture of the man taking the handcuffs and making Chauvin put his hands behind his back and walk into a penitentiary and learn that you will pay for the crimes you commit. As I talk closer to the family, they said that, well, the real reason they stopped was because his tags had expired. Well, I come to Minnesota to tell you your tags have expired. Your tags of racism has expired. Your tags of police brutality has expired. Your tags of white supremacy has expired. Your tags of looking at us different than everybody else has expired. Your tags have expired. It's time to renew and get some new tags. Tags of righteousness, tags of fairness, tags of treating everybody the same way, tags of no justice, no peace. Lastly, when I come to Minneapolis, 3 days after George Floyd was killed, lynched by knee, I went to one of the marches and I saw almost as many whites as blacks. Now your children are doing what you wouldn't do, standing up for justice. We called Martin Luther King III and I, National Action Network, called a march in Washington, August 28th, the anniversary of his father's march. People told me, don't call it, it's a pandemic, it's going to be a super spreader. But 204,000 people came. We tested them all. We did all we were supposed to do to see what way we could avoid any breaking out of COVID coming in. And we marched around the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. We marched around the John Lewis Voting Act because they're trying to turn back voting rights. Those tags done expired too. That ain't gonna happen no more. And we marched all over. Marched for Breonna Taylor, whose boyfriend is here with us today. Some went and stayed down there and stood up for Breonna. Getting ready to go march for Pamela Turner, May 13th in Texas. I hope y'all live in Texas. We on the way. Because your tags have expired. We're going to stop by North Carolina where a young man was shot yesterday. We're going to look in Columbus, Ohio. Your tags have expired. We're going wherever you show up because your tags have expired. In the name of the prophet Isaiah, we are not going to be quiet as long as there is no justice. I want you to know that this Bible that you claim you believe in, you need to stop quoting it and start reading it. It's a Bible of justice. And if you don't understand it, talk to some of us that read it straight. I know y'all had a president that holds it upside down, but turn it right side up. Because if you turn it right side up and you get to the end of the book, at the end of Revelations, God made a promise, Aubrey. God made a promise, Katie. He said the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And the lion and the lamb are going to lay down together, and God will take care of his children. God will make a way out of no way. God will heal the land. God will take care of Dante now. Stand up and be what we were born to be. We're not anyone's slaves. We're the children of God. We're the children of God. We're the children of God. Before we leave, and we're going to leave orderly, we're going to have the family go out first. And y'all that just became family for a day, Katie and Aubrey had to go outside and identify the family. All of y'all became cousins today. We want the family first, but we want some of those that have come to recognize the princely state that we're here and to give proclamations. They ought to be here. Whether you agree with them or not, they should be here to respect who he was and what he stood for. I read he was the center when he played basketball in school. Now he's the center of a movement of God. I want his brothers and sisters to keep your mother and father covered, because it won't be long for these crowds will be gone. Philando's mother could tell you that everybody's here when the cameras are here. But when the cameras go, a lot of your new cousins ain't gonna be there. And y'all gonna have to keep the family together. This police woman is charged. You're gonna have to go through a long trial. And they're gonna try things to not have a trial. But stay by your mother and father. Some of us will be here. And others will come when the cameras come back. I don't worry about the cameras. I got my own TV show. I ain't trying to get on TV. But stay strong and stay together. I saw his auntie on TV. She preached better than any preacher up here. Stand up, auntie. I want us to hear some proclamations and words. Let me start with another one that had been smeared, that God tested and they passed the test. Let us hear from our Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, for being here and for that beautiful eulogy. Most of us in this room, including myself, look at you as a guardian and are blessed to be in your presence. And may Daunte Wright serve as a guardian for all of us. But as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, as one of the youngest and newest members of the Congressional Black Caucus, I also have guardians. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and our chairwoman, Joyce Beatty, serve as guardians for me and many of my colleagues. Joyce Beatty was going to be here and speak on our behalf as the chairwoman of our caucus. But just like we've been visited by tragedy here in Minnesota often, she, in Columbus, Ohio, was visited by a tragedy of a young woman whose life was taken by Columbus police. And so I wanted to read a little bit of the resolution of congressional condolences that our guardian, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, filed on behalf of our son, Daunte Wright, here in Minnesota. Whereas Daunte Demetrius Wright attended Thomas Edison High School in Minneapolis, which I'm an alum of, and Blaine High School in Blaine, Minnesota, After high school, he studied at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities in Minneapolis. Daunte Demetrius Wright had a son born in July 2019. Daunte Demetrius Wright named his son Daunte Demetrius Wright Jr. And we are today comforted by the words of our Lord in the Revelation 21-4, which says, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things that passed away." No words can really help ease the pain, no words can really help to ease the loss you bear. Just know that your family and friends are very close in every thought and prayer. May the outpouring of sympathy, the kinds of acts of friends and strangers, the comfort in knowing that your loss is felt by many, help you through this. Daunte Demetrius Wright brought great joy to his family, and his life was a blessing to all who had the privilege to know him. Daunte Demetrius Wright is survived and cherished by his father, Aubrey Wright, and his mother, Katie Wright, and his son, Daunte Wright Jr., and a host of family and friends. And his legacy will live. We also wanted to present this to his mom and dad, if you all can come. We flew a flag over the United States Capitol on behalf of your son. And I wanted to present the flag to you.
Let them stay here a minute. We got something else to present them. All of this they deserve. When George Floyd was killed and we wanted the best prosecution, my mentor, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and I called the governor. And the governor talked to the DA, who graciously stepped back and allowed the Attorney General to be the prosecutor that did such a great job. And the governor's here with us today with a proclamation from the state.
As Governor of Minnesota, on behalf of the entire state and our population, we extend our deepest condolences to the Wright family and issue the following proclamation to honor the life and memory of Daunte Wright. Whereas Daunte Wright was beloved by his families, neighbors, community, and had his entire young life ahead of him, we mourn that loss. We know that this tragedy is connected to the deep and systemic racism in our society that Black people in Minnesota and across this country face every single day. While nothing will bring Daunte Wright back to his loved ones, we must continue to enact real, meaningful change at the local, state, and national levels to fight systemic racism so that every single person in Minnesota, Black, Indigenous, brown, and white, can be safe and thrive. We must be steadfast in our accountability to change from the top to the bottom and not rest until we create a different future for Daunte Wright's son and every other child like him. Now, therefore, I, Tim Walz, Governor of Minnesota, had ordered a moment of silence for 2 minutes across the entire state of Minnesota at 12 p.m. on Thursday, April 22nd, to honor the life and memory of Daunte Wright and his family and friends as they lay him to rest. And remember that every person whose life has been cut short due to systemic and racism and discrimination will not be forgotten.
In order to pass the George Floyd bill that has already passed the House, we need to pass it in the Senate. We have an advocate from the Senate, your senator in Minnesota, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Thank you so much, Reverend Al, and thank you, Bishop Howell, for allowing me to join you in this sacred space. Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Wright, and asking me to close out by saying a few words in your son's memory. I don't have a proclamation for you to give in a piece of paper. I've got a proclamation in the Senate, and that is that we must pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. You know, there's a photo of your son, of Daunte, that many Americans have seen by now. He's standing outdoors on a sparkling day, holding his son, Daunte Jr., and he's got this big smile on his face, that smile that you said, Katie, would light up the room. We see the lively, outgoing young man who always made people laugh, who was lovingly voted class clown his freshman year by his high school class. We see the basketball fan whose left-handed shot would make any coach proud. Most of all, we see Daunte's radiant love for his family as he holds his baby boy. In the photo, Daunte Jr. wears a colorful bib with polka dots and a bow tie, and the words "First Birthday" printed in cheerful letters across the front. And that's when we see the enormous hole Daunte leaves in the world. That's when we remember that he won't be there for his son's second birthday or high school graduation, or to see those grandkids. Racism in this country is not isolated, it is systemic. And so, when we ask ourselves why Daunte Jr. has to grow up without a dad, when we think about what could possibly fill this hole Daunte left in the world, we come up empty. Instead, we find a much bigger hole where justice should be. That word is so heavy on our minds this week, justice. 2 days ago, in a courtroom not 10 miles from where Daunte was shot, a jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of the murder of George Floyd, and the nation owes a debt of gratitude to the Floyd family. Thank you for being here. To my friend, Attorney General Keith Ellison, who's, by the way, Reverend Al, if I could introduce his family, Keith's family, who has had his back right there, if they could stand up. Keith's family, his wife, Monica, they had his back through everything. And to Ben Crump, Reverend Al, Reverend Jesse Jackson, all those in my state who have been warriors for justice. And yet, while this was a historic moment for our country, we cannot confuse accountability for justice. Because true justice is not done as long as having expired tags means losing your life during a traffic stop. True justice is not done as long as a chokehold, a knee on the neck, or a no-knock warrant is considered legitimate policing. True justice is not done as long as black Americans are killed by law enforcement at more than twice the rate of white Americans. And to use your words, Katie, true justice is not done as long as your son isn't coming home for dinner. Our hearts ache for Daunte in part because so many people in this room and throughout our state can imagine being 20 years old, driving around their neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, yes, even with expired registration tags, yes, even with an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Many young people can imagine calling their mom when they need insurance information or when they're scared. But only some can imagine being shot by a police officer during a traffic stop. Only some could imagine that this phone call would be their last. Only some live with that fear every single day. And that, Mr. Crump, as you know, is the definition of injustice. During that groundbreaking trial, George Floyd's family members, a store clerk, a firefighter, passerbys, as well as you noted, Reverend Al, a number of police officers testified about George Floyd and what happened that day. They told the truth. They said it was wrong. And we heard Darnella Fraser, a teenager who testified having witnessed George Floyd murder, say, "It's been nights I stay up, apologizing for George Floyd for not doing more." Could she have done more? No. It was not on her to change what happened that fateful day. And it's not on people who nearly a year later happened to be at the intersection of 63rd and Orchard in Brooklyn Center to change what happened to Daunte. It is on us as leaders in our communities, in our neighborhoods, as lawmakers. We can do more, we must do more, because for too long change has come inch by inch when we should be miles ahead. It is time for Washington, D.C. to move forward on police reform and pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. We must make policing more accountable. We have to change police training and standards, including banning chokeholds, which my colleague, Senator Smith, is leading the bill to ban chokeholds. Along with myself, she is up here with me on this stage. We have to change the status quo so that driving while black doesn't result in getting shot. This is the urgent task before us, not for tomorrow when I go back to Washington, not for tomorrow, not for next year, but for now. True justice. So as we remember Daunte's life and grieve his death, we must repair what's broken in this country and make sure class clowns and basketball fans, doting fathers and caring sons remain with us in body, as Daunte now does in spirit, Mrs. Wright. And we won't rest until justice, true justice, is done. That's my proclamation to you.
We are getting ready to go. Let me again thank our warrior, the Attorney General of Black America, Ben Crump. Give him a lot of love. A day before the final funeral of George Floyd in Houston, then candidate Joe Biden came to Houston and met with the Floyd family and Ben Crump and I, and showed us sensitivity. He's called them since then. He's met with the civil rights organization heads, convened by Mark Morial, the president of the National Urban League, who's here. And he said he would meet periodically, and we're calling on the president to meet. There needs to be a White House meeting on how we deal with these police incidents, one right after another, that he and the vice president are committed to. There needs to be a meeting with the Attorney General. We call for it right here in this funeral this morning. We have many mayors here, and we're glad that they're all present, and we are happy that you're here. We want the family to go out first. The ministers will lead them out. Then I want some of the activist groups, not just those of us that are known, but those that's been marching in the streets that made this happen. Many of you need to walk behind the family because you made this happen. And then I want our head of youth and college National Action Network, Minister Talik McMillan. My youngest daughter's with me, Ashley Sharpton, Reverend Bartley. Where's Until Freedom? They've been marching all over for Breonna. Where they at? Tell them that we want them to march with us. We want to go together. NAACP, Urban League, all of us. Mark, walk with the ministers, please, as we lead the family out. And make sure that you put your red light on, because some tags expired and we got to pull them over with a new law, the George Floyd law.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance and give you peace. In Jesus' name, amen.
You have been watching the memorial service for Daunte Wright, the 20-year-old who was shot and killed by police in Brooklyn Center. There were several other families of men that were killed by police in the crowd as well. George Floyd's family, Philando Castile's family there, Senator Amy Klobuchar, you just heard speak, Governor Walz was there, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, just to name a few. The Reverend Al Sharpton gave the eulogy, saying that people were commenting that they hadn't seen so many people at a funeral since Prince, and he said, well, we came here to bury the Prince of Brooklyn Center. You can stay with us for continuing coverage of Daunte Wright's memorial and the community response. We will bring you any updates and developments here on KARE 11, on our app, and our other digital platforms. And we will be back at 4, 5, 6, 6:30, and 10 with more news. Until then, we'll send you back to regular programming.
In the beginning, and I'll be there when you get to the end. I'm all seeing, all knowing, almighty, ever showing, for I am God. I was there in the beginning, yeah. And I'll be there when you get to the end. I'm all seeing, all knowing, almighty, ever showing, for I am, for provider. I'm a way maker. I'll give you peace. I'll give you gift. I'll give you joy in the midst of sorrow. 'Cause I still ain't know that I am. The one that conquers, the one that delivers, the one that makes a way. I'm your healer. I'm the deliverer. I'm a way maker. I am God. I'll take care. I am God. I'll make a way for you. I am I'm just until I know that I am. You make a way. I'm a no way. You take care. I know that I am. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's your way out.
Covering us when we die, cover us while we're living. Amen. Okay, here we need y'all there. We need the sour, we need y'all to the ground. Try to be respectful. We need y'all to the ground. Hey, back them up a little bit more. Back up. Back up. Back up. Back up. Oh, we got Little John. He's gone. That's okay. Oh! Sidewalk? Yeah, I gotta clean that first. Go fast. Hey. I need a sidewalk right here. Right Yeah, that much better. It ain't burning too much.
Here with reaction, Fox News contributor Laura Trump, along with football legend, Heisman Trophy winner Herschel Walker. Now, it's interesting having both of you on because I've seen polling on both of you. Happens to be for the same office in two different states. Herschel, I have the Trafalgar poll. Robert Cahaly, friend of this program, and he has you beating as Senator Warnock. Laura Trump, last poll I saw in terms of getting the nomination, you were up by a whopping 15 points. And you would win the general election, according to that poll. So both of you are in a pretty unique position. Herschel, we'll start with you, because I've already pressured Laura enough. She probably hates me right now as a Fox News contributor and friend. Herschel Walker, are you considering a run for the U.S. Senate from the state of Georgia?
Well, I'm honored that they keep saying that if I'm considering it. And as I told everyone, guys, I'm weighing my options. But I can promise you this, and this is probably what the pollster have seen, that if I run, I'm running to win. Because right now what's going on in this country is absolutely, absolutely terrible. I believe in God, I believe in country, and I believe in family. And I can tell you all Americans are my family. It is sad that people are not standing up for the law. I believe in law and order. I hate to tell everyone out there this country was built on that. I'm tired of hearing about Black America, white America, Asian America, Hispanic America. This is the United States of America, and we got to get back to that. We got to get leaders in Washington that believe in that, and that's how we're going to fix this here.
Do I hear Georgia's on your mind? I don't know. It sounds a little bit like that to me.
Well, Georgia's always on my mind. It's been on my mind, and that's what people don't realize. Just because I was living in Texas, I have a lot of stuff there in Georgia, and and that's why I say I'm honored that they're considering me running for Senate. But I do have to do all my due diligence, and see what in the world is going on, and then I'm gonna weigh my options and figure this out.
And if you run, you're in to win. You know, Laura, I guess there's probably a lot of
there's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Laura, I assume in your case there's a lot of pressure, but it is amazing that you really, the American people and the people of North Carolina, that's your home state, that's where you were born and raised, know you so well. They're showing incredible confidence in you. That's got to give you reason to pause somewhat, no?
Absolutely. Look, I'm so honored. I'm so humbled when I see these polls. It's amazing to see, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm going to echo there what Herschel said. We need strong leaders. We need people in 22 and 24 that have the best interests of the American people at heart, because you're exactly right, Herschel. What we have seen happen in America, it's so tragic. It's so disturbing. We've got to get this country back on track. So I love seeing this polling. I'm so honored. Obviously, as you said, my home state, I love it. It is a decision that I am also weighing. Again, nothing to break here on Hannity tonight, but maybe Herschel and I will come back together and give you our final decision. We'll see.
Okay, it'd be like the final episode of The Apprentice. We'll do a 2-hour special, you know. Both of you touched on something, though. This agenda of the Democrats, the spending, the borders, packing the courts, ending the legislative filibuster, everything that they're proposing, I've never seen anything like it. And I've never been more concerned, Herschel and Laura, we'll let you have first. I've never been concerned about the direction of the country like I am now.
Well, it starts at the top. It starts, unfortunately, with the president right now, Joe Biden, and there is a total lack of leadership. It's been very sad to see, obviously, what has happened on our southern border, the fact that that has not been addressed in any way, shape, or form by our vice president, Kamala Harris, who was tasked with that 3+ weeks ago now. She hasn't visited. She hasn't held a press conference about it. You see so many people that I think feel very disturbed, and we're only in April right now. Joe Biden took office January 20th. So if you're upset about the way things are going now, just hold on. We haven't even talked about what's happening around the world as it relates to America. Remember, when Donald Trump was in office, it was America first. We were protected. We were safe. We took care of our country. It seems very different now. So, look, I think the American people come 2022 are going to be ready for a significant change. And I think by 24, they're going to be totally done with the Harris-Biden, Biden-Harris, however they're calling it, in the White House.
Herschel, will give you the last word tonight. You see now internationally aggression by China, aggression by Russia, aggression by the Iranians. We have no idea what North Korea is up to. And then look at the economy. And look at the high taxes that are coming. Look at all the regulation. Look at all the jobs being lost in the energy sector, for example.
Well, I think people should be very concerned about all of this. And the reason why is we're the greatest country in the world. Right now, we're going to give China an opportunity to take us over. And I think one thing that we got to do, we got to fight for it. We are Americans. And if people don't like it, and I hate to say this, get out. Right now, we got to fight for America. I think we got to get leaders in Washington that want to fight for America, because right now we're giving it away. And I don't want to do that. I'm going to be honest. I'm not giving it away. I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to do whatever I can for it. And that's the reason I say I'm going to weigh my opportunity here. And I want to thank everyone in America for it. I want to thank everyone in Georgia. But I will let you know, as Laura just said, you know what, maybe we'll come back and give someone some news and let them know what's going to be going on.
America needs strong leaders that make promises and fight to keep them. It's not that complicated. Thank you both. Laura Trump, thank you. Herschel Walker, thank you.
Arms. That vote was 5-4. The 4 dissenting justices were prepared effectively to erase the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights, to conclude that no American anywhere has an individual right to keep and bear arms. These are radical and extreme ideas, and by the way, they're incredibly unpopular ideas. There's a reason the Democrats don't want to actually go to the voters and try to convince the voters to do this, because the voters would tell them to jump in a lake. So instead, they're trying to rig the game. Instead, they're trying to fix the system. They're behaving like corrupt politicians. And by the way, just a few years ago, Republicans were in the same position. 2017, all of us were here. We had a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House. We didn't do this. We could have. They love to say Donald Trump, to paint him as some crazy autocrat. You didn't see Republicans, when we had control of the Senate, try to rig the game. You didn't see us try to pack the court. There was nothing that would have prevented Republicans from doing what they're doing, other than respect for the rule of law, other than basic decency, other than recognizing that democracy matters. And packing the court and tearing down the institutions that protect our rights is fundamentally wrong. And the American people need to know this is not, look, we can have arguments back and forth about tax rates. Democrats want to raise taxes, we don't. Fine. That's the bread and butter of politics. That's the sort of thing you're supposed to debate in the Capitol. What we shouldn't be debating is a radical plan to destroy the United States Supreme Court, to destroy judicial independence, and to destroy the rights that are protected in the Bill of Rights. All of those are hanging in the balance.
Thanks, Ted. And Ted's exactly right. Can you even imagine what Joy Reid and her MSNBC friends would be saying if Republicans had tried to pack the court? They would just lose it, and it would be nonstop coverage. One of the things that we do know is that the Democrats are trying to pack the court to turn it into a super legislative body so that they have people that are going to rubber stamp everything that they believe. Everything. Whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it is H.R. 1, whether it's the Equality Act. And if they are successful, you will not see life protected. You will see government-run health care. You are not going to see your rights protected, and I guarantee you they will come to take away your guns. These are things you can count on because this is their agenda. Their policies are so unpopular, they know they could not get it through the House and the Senate. Why are they keeping the Capitol in lockdown? Why are they keeping people away, not giving them the opportunity to petition their government? They are doing it because they want to radically change this country and radically change our institutions. So, are we standing against their push to pack the court? Absolutely. Will we continue to fight to preserve our liberties? Absolutely, we will. These institutions are important to the American people, and they want to see us stand for the Constitution, for freedom, for liberty, for these institutions that have kept this nation free. Lindsay?
Yes. Senator Graham, what do you think Senator Schumer's end game is here? Today, the House is going to vote on D.C. statehood, and then he's committed to bringing up some of these other bills that you mentioned previously in opening remarks. Is it to try to, what do you think his end game is here with this legislation, bringing it up against the filibuster?
I think his end game is not get primaried by AOC.
Yeah.
I think Nancy Pelosi's end game is to keep her job. I think Joe Biden's end game is try to be the most progressive president since FDR, and that his whole campaign turns out to be a fraud. So the bottom line is, I think Senator Schumer is being pressed very hard by the most extreme people in the House and, quite frankly, the Senate. And I'm worried. 2022 will be here before you know it. So this election cycle is incredibly important. If we can take back the House, what happens today with D.C. statehood would not happen. So I think Senator Schumer said it best. All options are on the table. And he's telling us as Republicans, if we don't toe the line and be good boys and girls, he will take the Senate and change it to push this agenda through, including packing the court. We're here today to tell Senator Schumer we were under pressure. President Trump argued every day about changing the filibuster rule so we could get the things that we wanted through, and many of us said no. And that comes with a cost. So I'm asking Senator Schumer to think about the consequences to the country. Think about the consequences to the court. And where does this end? Will there be an effort to break California into 3 states? If we get power back, will there be 20 Supreme Court justices? Will they be 5? Packing the court was rejected by Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a bad idea. What have I learned in this whole process? How compliant the media is with this agenda. If Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Marsha Blackburn, when we were in charge, came up with these ideas, you would eat us alive. You can't find this in the sports page. Mitch McConnell constantly says it's never reported that Justice Breyer and Ginsburg are against expanding the court because it destroys the court. So what are we here today to do? To tell our Democratic colleagues, if you go down this road, you destroy the country and there's no going back, because we'll have to push back. Every option's on the table for me. If I have to stay in South Carolina to deny a quorum to do this crazy stuff, destroying the court, take over our election process, on and on and on, I will. The road to anarchy is being paved with this agenda. The destruction of the systems that have kept us a free people are at risk. What would I do to prevent that? Everything in my power. And what am I asking? Back off. I didn't do this. I'm not asking you to do anything I wasn't willing to do. When the pressure was put on us, we said no. Because what's the use of being up here if you can't make it better? And better is allowing every American through the ballot box to have a chance to say how their country would be. If a third world emerging democracy did this, the State Department with all of us would be talking about a puppet government creating a puppet court. We would be pushing back all over the world if somebody tried to do this. This is being done in America in 2021. And we're here to say we're going to fight back.
So right now, many progressives are using the race card to kind of push through their agenda. I just came from a filibuster press conference that the Progressive Caucus had, trying to end the filibuster, and they were using the race card as a part of that. We know with, the Black Lives Matter riots and everything. What is your response to using race in order to push through?
So I will let my other colleague, but that's exactly what they're doing. I had dinner with Joe Manchin last night. Jim Clyburn, who is a congressman in my state, I've known Jim for a long time. I try to work with him where I can. We have different political philosophies, but I always found him to be a decent man. He is basically saying Joe Manchin is embracing racism by not embracing the filibuster. The President of the United States, who I've traveled with throughout the entire world working on problems, has called every Republican, every person who supports Georgia voting reform, Jim Crow 2.0. The terms being used to try to bully us into agreeing to this agenda won't work. I voted for citizen reform. I would like to work with my Democratic colleagues on police reform. So to my Democratic colleagues, playing the race card won't work. It diminishes you, not us. There's nothing racist about keeping the filibuster. And here's the question. If it's a tool of racism, why did they use it so much when they were in the minority? Why did they use it to stop Tim Scott's ability to have a discussion about police reform? This is hypocrisy, and it's not going to work.
Tim Scott. Sorry.
Thank you.
On Tim Scott's police reform, we've seen that he's floated the idea of maybe having qualified immunity not apply to departments but still apply to officers. Do you think that that is a good starting point for negotiations?
I'd be willing to talk with my colleagues about police reform. Yeah. I talked with Tim last night. We're going to have a meeting later in the week. I don't want cops to be sued. I want their employers to be sued. I don't want a cop to have to lose their house or their car by going to work. If they did something wrong, they can be held accountable under the law. But the idea of suing individual police officers in these days and times, I think needs to be renewed, revisited, because I think it's deterring people from being cops. So our point is we're willing to work with folks within a system that protects us all and gives us voice. So yes, police reform is possible in this partisan environment. But the more you do this, the more you assault democracy as we know it, the more you challenge all of us in our character, the harder it is to get something done. President Biden, you promised to bring us together. You're doing a lousy job.
Well, and the last several questions that were asked are actually all interrelated. You look at police reform. Are there reforms we need to do? Yes, and all of us worked with our friend and colleague Tim Scott on a reasonable police reform bill in the prior Congress. Every single Democrat filibustered police reform. These same Democrats that are now posturing that a filibuster is racist, every one of them, Dick Durbin stood on the Senate floor right across the street, and he derided Tim Scott, an African-American senator from the South, as a token. That's disgusting. That has no place in political discussions. But today's Democrats, on every topic, they go to race. And if you oppose whatever radical agenda they're trying to push, they call you a racist. The Democrats filibustered hundreds of times when Republicans had the majority. You know, you talk about police reform. I agree with Lindsay that we want to protect officers, that an individual officer shouldn't face crushing civil liability for doing his or her job, and that there are a lot of officers right now, the left likes to demonize cops, likes to immediately assume when something happens that the police officer is to blame. That's wrong, that's a mistake. The vast majority of police officers are heroic men and women risking their lives to keep us safe. Now, if a police officer breaks the law, they're held accountable. We saw that in the Chauvin verdict this week. That's also how the justice system operates. That's how it's meant to operate, but we allow the justice system to work fairly and impartially. This institution that we're standing in front of is what protects all of this. You know, I've done many press conferences on the steps of the court after arguing cases inside the court. I actually represented a man, John Thompson, who was wrongfully convicted of capital murder and spent 14 years on death row in Louisiana. And he was exonerated. He was proven innocent. And he sued the prosecutors that had suppressed the evidence that convicted him, and he got a $14 million judgment. And I represented him here at the Supreme Court trying to fight to defend that judgment. Unfortunately, we lost 5-4. I think it is important when your constitutional rights are violated that you have redress, you have a way of getting compensated for that. But we depend upon this institution being fair and impartial. You look at what Democrats are trying to do. Last year, Chuck Schumer stood up here with Democrats and threatened the justices and said, "You will reap the whirlwind threaten the justices with political retribution, and we're seeing that retribution as they're trying to rig the Supreme Court. Political disagreements are fine. That's part of politics. And if the voters disagree with some policy being pushed by whoever is in control, they can throw the bums out and put the other bums in charge. That's how the democratic process is meant to work. But what Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are doing is trying to rig the system. They're trying to cheat and break the rule of law. That is a profound threat. And, you know, Lindsay referenced Joe Biden. All three of us have served with Joe. Joe used to be a reasonable guy. The Joe Biden who swore me into the Senate 9 years ago, I don't know where that guy is. I think they got him tied up in a basement somewhere because it's the crazies who are running the ship. And so I'd like to see the Joe Biden we served with escape from the basement and come out and say, all right, we're not going to break the system, we're not going to cheat, and we're not going to destroy the Supreme Court of the United States. This is a time, look, Joe Biden has wanted to be president since he's 2 years old. Now, I'm not one to throw rocks at that particular instinct. But you know what? He is president now, so act like it. And a president has an obligation under the Constitution to take care that the laws are followed. He's not doing that. He is allowing the crazies in his party to tear down the Constitution, to tear down the Bill of Rights, and to tear down the Supreme Court. That is incredibly dangerous.
Speaking of Biden, can I get your reaction, Senator Graham, to President Biden's climate plan committing to cutting greenhouse emissions in half by 2030? He's announcing that today.
I don't know. I'll be glad to look at it. I'm speaking for myself. I believe climate change is real. I believe the Green New Deal is a terrible deal for the United States. You can't really solve the problem unless India and China are involved. I'll be glad to look at it. I'll be glad to work with President Biden on infrastructure. I'll be glad to have a healthy conversation about climate change. I'll be glad to find common ground where I can, but I am going to echo what Senator Cruz said. Mr. President, there's some real big assaults on democracy and democratic institutions occurring on your watch and your AWOL. You said it was a bonehead idea for FDR to try to pack the court. You're sitting on the sidelines while you're president, forming a commission that may actually do that. The Joe Biden that was progressive but reasonable needs to emerge, because it's pretty hard for me to sit down and try to find a way to solve problems when your party is trying to destroy the country as I know it. So I would just ask that President Biden have a timeout on some of these radical ideas so that we can find some common ground. Today, they're going to try to make D.C. a state. The Constitution created the District of Columbia for a purpose, that the place we govern ourselves nationally, one state won't have an advantage over the other. If you're worried about people in the District of Columbia being disenfranchised, they can participate in Maryland politics. This is a power grab. Packing the court is a power grab. H.R. 1 is a power grab. The filibuster elimination is a power grab. So the Joe Biden presidency is not problem solving thus far. It's the biggest power grab in my lifetime. And I know that the Joe Biden that I worked with all these years would not be a part of this. Something has changed. Something has changed in the Democratic Party that needs to be dealt with. The people pushing this agenda need to be toned down by their own party. There's only so much we can do. I have done that at times with my own party. I'm getting worried, nervous, and scared about the next 18 months.
Senators, how is court packing any different than what the Republicans did in 2016 and
So big email or text message from Anna. Yeah, I know. I should.
Of D.C. statehood since she came to Congress. She has been tireless, persistent, and dissatisfied. She has built historic support for this bill, which passed in the previous Congress with 235 votes. I rise as Speaker of the House to join my colleagues on this momentous day for American democracy as we right an historic injustice by passing legislation to finally grant Washington, D.C. statehood. Statehood for the District of Columbia is about showing respect for our democracy, for the American people, and for our Constitution. That Constitution begins with our preamble, "We the people," setting out our founders' vision of a government of, by, and for the people. Yet for more than 2 centuries, the people of Washington, D.C. have been denied their right to fully participate in our and their democracy. D.C., as the gentlewoman mentioned, Congresswoman Norton mentioned, pays more federal taxes per capita than any other state. Its budget is larger than 12 states. Its population is larger than 2 states. Its people have fought in every American war since the Revolution. D.C. residents have been fighting for voting rights and autonomy for 220 years, with a full 86% recently voting for statehood. And it is well past the time to grant them the rights that they have been fighting for and that they deserve. As I said, Mr. Speaker, I rise as Speaker of the House on this momentous occasion, but it is an official honor to do so, but it is also a personal privilege to join Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, the distinguished chair of the Committee of Jurisdiction, Congresswoman Maloney, and others of my colleagues, our distinguished Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer, who has made this part of his life's work in the Congress, so to join in this fight for statehood. But it's, as I say, a personal privilege because when I was born, my father was a member of Congress from Baltimore, Maryland, Thomas D'Alessandro Jr., who served as chairman of the District of Columbia Appropriations Subcommittee. That position made him the unofficial mayor of Washington because of the authority that the committee had over the District of Columbia and their every decision. However, my father did not agree with that. He was a proponent for what was then called home rule. So I often say that statehood for the District of Columbia is in my DNA. They went from home rule, then finally having a mayor, and now we want statehood. There is not, and we've always wanted statehood, but now we finally are able to pass it in the Congress. There's nothing theoretical or abstract about statehood. For example, last summer, the country watched in horror as federal agents and out-of-state National Guard troops were deployed against peaceful protesters in the district without residents' approval. And then, on January 6th, as our Capitol was being defiled and our Capitol Police assaulted and killed, and our members and staff terrorized, D.C. leaders did not have the authority to call in the National Guard to protect its people. Granting D.C. statehood means ensuring that its leaders have the tools they need to keep people safe. The governor of any one of our states has the authority to call in the National Guard. That is not an authority that is afforded to the mayor of Washington, D.C. If that were the case, we would have had protection much sooner. Statehood is also a matter of civil rights. The residents of the district have a right to self-governance and control over their lives and futures. And it's particularly meaningful that we passed this legislation just days after the anniversary of President Abraham Lincoln signing the District of Columbia Compensation Emancipation Act, freeing enslaved people in the district. Today, by passing H.R. 51, to admit the state of Washington Douglas Commonwealth to the Union, the House will finally address this unjust, unequal, and undemocratic situation. We look forward to a swift vote in the Senate on this essential legislation so that we can send this important legislation to the President's desk. At the same time, House Democrats will continue our work to protect every American's right to be heard at the ballot box. With that, I urge a strong vote for D.C. statehood, 51, and H.R. 51 today, easy to remember, and for its citizens' civil liberties, security, and the right to have a say in our democracy. And as I yield back, I once again want to commend Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton for her long dedication to justice for every person in our country, starting with the people she represents in the District of Columbia, hopefully soon to be the 51st state of the Union. With that, I urge that I vote and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from California yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you what Democrat support is really about of H.R. 51. Democratic partisanship, Democrat power, Democrat policy, Democratic progressive issues. No state has been admitted by the Constitution, but no state was created from a territory which was crafted in the Constitution. That's what you want to obviate. Even our founders understood very clearly, as they iterated in Federalist 43, quote, the indispensable necessity of complete authority at the seat of government carries its own evidence with it. It is a power exercised by every legislature of the Union, I might say of the world, by virtue of its general supremacy. Without it, not only the public authority might be insulted and its proceedings interrupted with impunity, but a dependence of the members of the general government on the state comprehending the seat of government for protection and the exercise of their duty might bring on the national councils an imputation of awe or influence. That is what is at stake here. H.R. 51 is bad according to the founders, but it also violates the 23rd Amendment. That is clear as well. And it's time that the Democrats realize it and quit trying this power grab and vote this thing down. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia and chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee, Jerry Connolly.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my good friend, the distinguished chairwoman of our full committee, and my good friend Eleanor Holmes Norton, the congresswoman from the District of Columbia, who soon, I hope, will have the right to vote on the floor of the House. Today, Mr. Speaker, we come together to right a wrong. 750,000 fellow Americans are denied the right to representation in their Congress, in the very place in which Congress is located, ironically. The only capital in the democratic world that denies its own citizens the right to vote and be represented. We've heard a lot of subterfuge here today, and we'll hear more about the Constitution. The Constitution that clearly gives Congress the right of admission of a state. Mr. Comer comes from Kentucky. Kentucky was composed of territory claimed by my state, Virginia. And they were a bunch of Whigs. We didn't object. And Congress, not a constitutional amendment, admitted Kentucky into the Union. And they elected Whigs, if you can think about that, Mr. Speaker. But we didn't make how you might vote a condition. But we do in this case. And I gotta say, there's a lot of smokescreen to cloak what's really at stake here. When some say this is not about race or partisanship, you can be sure it's about race and partisanship. A city with a majority population that apparently might vote in a different way from some. So what? How somebody votes cannot be a test of whether they have the right to vote in a democracy. Will we right this wrong today? Will we rise above our petty partisan perspectives and fears and empower and enfranchise people who are fellow citizens simply because of their race or their party identification or their geographic location? That is not the America I know and love. It's gone on too long. When the Constitution was written, this place didn't exist. Nor did the founders and the writers of the Constitution know that it would. The first capital was New York. The second capital was Philadelphia. And there was a lot of back and forth about where would it finally be. It ended up here. Let's right this wrong after 200 years and give our fellow Americans voting representation here in the United States Congress by granting statehood. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if this bill's about race, I wonder why your majority leader, Steny Hoyer, voted against this very bill in 1993.
Yeah.
But with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, Democrats started last week with one of their members saying we should get rid of the police altogether. They ended last week with another one of their members being admonished by the trial judge in Minneapolis for saying ridiculous things. And what they do in between? They pass this bill out of committee, which gives 2 new Democrat senators to the District of Columbia. And less than 24 hours after that bill passed in committee, they introduced legislation to pack the Supreme Court. In 3 months of Democrats being in control of the federal government, they have increased the debt by $2 trillion. They created a crisis on the southern border, and they continue their push to defund the police. And now, so they can continue their radical policies, think about what else they've passed out of this body. A bill to federalize our voting laws, federalize our election laws, A bill to pack the court, as I said. They introduced that. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, of all people, introduced that bill. And here we are today, pure power grab to give 2 Democrat senators to District of Columbia. There is a crisis on our southern border. The American people want us to focus on the crisis. Even the president called it a crisis. Let's stop the power grab. Let's deal with the issues the American people want us to deal with. That's what we should be focused on. I hope we vote this bill down. I urge a no vote and yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to clarify that this should be a bipartisan issue. Republicans used to support voting representation in Congress for D.C. residents. Then President Eisenhower called for equal political rights for D.C. residents in 3 State of the Union addresses. Then President Nixon said, and I quote, "It should offend the democratic senses of this nation that D.C. residents do not have voting representation in Congress." In 2007, then Representative Mike Pence said on the floor, and I quote, "The fact that more than 500,000 Americans living in the District of Columbia are denied a single voting representative in Congress is clearly a historic wrong." With that, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland and chairman of the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Subcommittee, Jamie Raskin.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Chair. The consent of the governed. No taxation without representation. No conscription without representation. A Republican form of government for American citizens. All of our most essential democratic principles underwrite the trajectory of American political development, which has been the admission of 37 new states since the original 13 launched the Union. All of these states were admitted by one mechanism and one mechanism only, an act of Congress, exercising congressional power under Article 4, Section 3 to admit new states. There has never been a new state admitted by constitutional amendment. There has never been a state admission struck down by the United States Supreme Court, because the admission of new states is a political question in the juridical sense, which means it is vested exclusively in Congress to decide whether or not to admit new states. It is an exercise of the plenary power and judgment of the Congress, the people's branch. It is up to Congress to act. The opponents of democracy for 712,000 tax-paying, draftable American citizens right here in Washington, D.C., have now focused on the 23rd Amendment as the basis of their opposition, but the 23rd Amendment is no obstacle in any way. The purpose of the 23rd Amendment was to make sure that the local population got to participate in presidential elections. The admission of the new state vindicates that constitutional purpose. H.R. 51 itself would immediately repeal the federal statute that organizes the Electoral College for the District of Columbia, taking care of the problem that our friends are concerned about. So why don't they support H.R. 51? Well, the floor leader gave the game away when he said for him this was all about 2 new progressive liberal Democrat senators. It's all about 2 new liberal Democrat senators. They don't see taxation without representation. They don't see military service without representation, when tens of thousands of people from the nation's capital have served America in every war that we've ever had, going back to the Revolutionary War. They don't see governance without representation, without the consent of the governed. All that they see is 2 new liberal Democrat senators. But that cuts against everything that we believe in about American democracy. We do not deny people the right to vote based on our expectation of how they will vote. We don't disenfranchise people because we disagree with who they might elect. I would defend with my life the right of the people of Kentucky and Arizona to send my friends here, even to represent them, even though I disagree with most of what they stand for, including their rejection of the rights of people from Washington, D.C. And I would never disenfranchise them
just because of that. The people of Washington.
Gentleman's time has expired.
30 seconds.
I yield the gentleman additional 30 seconds.
The people of Washington came to our aid on January 6th. When we were being attacked by violent fascist insurrectionists in this body, in this chamber, in this Congress, they came to our aid. They sent hundreds of Capitol officers and National Guardsmen to defend us. The people of Washington defend our democratic rights. Will we defend theirs? That's the question of H.R. 51. Let's pass statehood for the people of Washington.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. My friend from Maryland makes an excellent closing case in court because he knows that this is going to be in court, because he knows that this is constitutionally infirm. And he's trying to make the case that's going to have to be made in court on the losing side of the argument, because it is very clearly unconstitutional to add D.C. as a state by statute. And what we have here today is a simple question. Does anybody in this room believe that if Lubbock, Texas, had been set up as the capital seat of the United States of America, that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would be arguing to give it the position of statehood? No, of course not. This city was set up by the founders to be the capital seat of the United States of America. It was not set up to be a state. And when my friend said that every other state has been added by statute, none of those had been specifically set up as the capital seat of the United States of America. This should be rejected. It is unconstitutional. D.C. has never been a state. It shouldn't be a state, and it's not going to be a state.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman, Danny Davis.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for yielding to me. And also, I want to commend you, Chairman Maloney, on your outstanding leadership of this committee. I also want to take a moment and commend my colleague who has been championing D.C. statehood before I even came to Congress. You know, I've listened intently to all of the arguments, and it always gets back to one. How are the people more likely to vote? And they're going to vote more likely Democratic. Are they going to vote for Democrats? Well, let me tell you, I got people in my district who vote Republican. Can you imagine that? They vote Republican. But we don't deny them the right to vote. And we don't deny them the right to representation. All that we're seeking and all that we're asking for is simply the principle that no taxation without representation. I think we learned that in grammar school when we took U.S. history, when we first learned how great this country is and how great it can be. Well, I look forward to the people of Washington, D.C. having all rights of citizenship as a member of a state, voting in the greatest state in the country when it becomes one, Washington, D.C. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1964, then Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy summed it up best as to why the framers put the capital outside the borders or control of any state. It was indispensably necessary, this is his quote, it was indispensably necessary to the independence and the very existence of the new federal government to have a seat of government which was not subject to the jurisdiction or control of any state. As true as that was when this was said, as true as that was when our nation, when a capital was moved here, it's that true today. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I'm glad, remember history, when the seat of the federal government was in New York City and in Philadelphia, the birthplace of America. They didn't want it in the control of a state. Therefore, the District of Columbia was created. The District of Columbia, under the control of the United States Congress, that is who should be determining what happens for the 50 states. Our colleagues on the other side want to change an amendment to the Constitution with law. What about other amendments to the Constitution and how they read those? Will they try to change those with law? This is not about representation without taxation or taxation without representation. This is about a Democrat power grab. And let's call it what it is.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I now yield lady from Texas, Congresswoman Jackson Lee.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the distinguished chairwoman, and I thank the distinguished member, Congresswoman from the District of Columbia. In the Judiciary Committee right now, we are holding hearings to fight against the scourge of voter suppression and the unfortunate abolishment of Section 5 by the Shelby case. I have heard shoutings of hallelujah when that case was abolished. The reason is because we are here today denying citizens of the United States the right to be represented fairly in the United States Congress. The 23rd Amendment, well, I can cite for you the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, not depriving people of their liberty and their justice. What about those soldiers who shed blood from the District of Columbia? Those who are paying taxes from the District of, who work to move the engine of government living in the District of Columbia. My friends know that the capital will be separated. My friends understand that there is a basic constitutional unfairness when you deny people the right to vote. And I wonder whether or not the problem is that when I first arrived here many years ago, it was called Chocolate City. Let us not make this a racial issue. Let us make this a justice issue, a constitutional issue. It is important, Mr. Speaker. Vote for this legislation for the 51st state. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grofman.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
D.C. statehood is a ridiculous idea which should have shocked our forefathers. It's or minimal manufacturing, agriculture, or natural resources. With all its government jobs and universities, it's a recession-proof city and should be one of the easiest cities in the nation to govern. Let's see how the current elected officials are doing. This is the second highest spending area in the country per pupil. How do they do? Tied for worst of fourth grade reading scores. Worst in the country in eighth grade reading scores. Worst in the country fourth grade writing scores. Worst in the country eighth grade writing scores. Second worst in the country in eighth grade math. They have more homeless here than 29 states. Of the cities with at least 600,000 people, they have the sixth highest murder rate. And if they were to become a state, it would immediately be the state with the highest murder rate in the country. Right now, by 9% of the parents' newborn children in the District of Columbia are married. By comparison, again, a great foreign capital, Taipei, 96% of the parents are married. The government, this is a government city, and it would do a horrible job as a state.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, under the admissions clause of the Constitution, Congress has the authority to admit new states. And that's why all 37 new states have been admitted by simple legislation. No state has ever been admitted by a constitutional amendment. And the Republicans want D.C. to use an admissions process that has never been used in the history of this country. The District Clause of the Constitution gives Congress authority over the federal district and establishes a maximum size of the federal district, 100 square miles. It does not establish a minimum size. H.R. 51 would maintain a 2 square mile federal district. And with that, I reserve and yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves from New York. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from South Carolina, Ms. Mace.
Gentlewoman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've seen more damage done in the first 100 days of this administration than I thought possible in 4 years. Rather than unity, it's been division. Rather than working together, it's been partisanship. And we're hearing even comments that we're trying to stoke racial division in this country. This is nothing but a naked power play today. That's all this is about. People who can't get their radical agenda passed under the system our framers set up now want to blow it up. This is nothing but ideological terrorism. Please ignore our Constitution and system of government. Whether it's attacks on the First, Second, or Fourth Amendment or turn far left senators, they simply do not care. They want what they want. This is not about a balance of power. This is about more power. This is about government-run health care, a $93 trillion Green New Deal, packing the Supreme Court, higher taxes, and a bigger, less efficient form of government. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from South Carolina yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Illinois and Senior Chief Deputy Whip, Congresswoman Sharkowski.
Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in strong support of ending the disenfranchisement of over 700,000 people, including most of the staff that works for us every single day. Our nation is the only democratic country in the world that denies full democratic rights to the citizens living in its nation's capital. That's more than 700,000 American citizens who pay federal taxes, who fight and die in wars, who serve on our juries, and yet have no vote in the Senate or the House of Representatives. That is the definition of taxation without representation. It is 219 years overdue for the citizens of the District of Columbia to have their right to vote. Let me thank and commend my colleague Eleanor Holmes Norton for all of her decades of work. It is time to vote yes on statehood for the District of Columbia. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Illinois yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Making D.C. a city-state is unconstitutional, it's impractical, and it flies in the face of the founders' intent. James Madison said it himself in the Federalist Papers. Unfortunately, our colleagues across the aisle are trying to make this about race. I thought that was inevitable, and it's sad and unfortunate. But let's look at data. In 1800, this city was a white majority, 10,600 and 4,000 African-American residents. Then 150 years later, in 1950, 517,000 white residents to 280,000 African-American residents. So for 150 years, this was a white majority city, and there was no serious effort to make it a state. But there is a way we can solve this issue, because one core argument is a pretty good one. No taxation without representation. It's flawed because there is local government, and they have a delegate here. But with retrocession, making Washington and bringing it back into Maryland would give them that added seat and would address that very issue. And the GOP is acting in good faith because we know that that seat will be a Democratic seat, but it's the right thing to do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a champion for equality and the 51st state, to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I thank the chair for yielding, and I rise in very strong support of this legislation. I want to just briefly respond to the remarks of the gentleman who preceded me about retrocession. Retrocession is an interesting idea that my Republican colleagues have. It has to do with the issue of 2 United States senators. One could say that has to do on both sides of the aisle, 2 United States senators. The history of adding states
has been a history where focus is on those 2 United States senators that would be added. And the party that wanted them, the party that didn't want them. But retrocession, frankly, is an interesting idea, except for the fact that the gentleman talked about the Founding Fathers and James Madison, the Federalist Papers, and one of the articles of debate were if you had a state, i.e. Maryland, whose land, of course, the federal city is located on. Virginia gave some, but they took it back. You would have a state surrounding the federal enclave. No difference, except it would be Maryland and not Washington, Douglas Commonwealth. So that argument limps. It fails because you're suggesting the same thing that some have said is of concern to them. So the only difference is 2 senators. So this is about politics. Throughout history, people have guessed as to what the new states are going to be. Now, some knew, absolutely. We have North and South Dakota. I don't know whether any of you know why we have North and South Dakota. 2 senators versus 4 senators. And the Republicans who were in charge wanted to have 4 senators to assure their majority in the Senate as opposed to the Democrats in the South. Ironic how things change. So if you're voting on politics, I get it. But on principle, Nevada was added and taken from Utah, by the way, because the Republicans who were then in charge back in the day wanted to have 2 additional senators. And they got them. With less than 10,000 people living in the area that was taken from Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado and formed Nevada. So let's not get mired in these principled votes because this is about 2 senators. We get it. It is not about principle because there are over 700,000 people. 712 to be exact, maybe more when we get the census report, who are unequal citizens in America. I want to thank the incomparable Eleanor Holmes Norton for her hard work and tireless advocacy for so many years as the leader of this cause. On behalf of equal rights for the citizens she represents, without a vote. Why? Are they lesser citizens? Is she a lesser representative? Surely not. If a president of the United States, Republican or Democrat, asks somebody to come to the District of Columbia and work for the U.S. government, bring your talents, your energy, and your focus to work for your country in Washington, D.C. But, oh, by the way, you have to give up your vote in the Congress of the United States through your representative. In no other democracy are residents of the national capital excluded from representation. None. Frankly, I think the founders had no concept of how big this city would become, how vibrant it would become. None. Yet nearly 700,000 Americans are denied full representation. The founders of our union of states set forth a simple process for the admission of new states to that union. They believed, the 13 of them, that adding new states would be positive for the country and that they would want people represented in the territories, in the Congress, when they became states and qualified to be such. They saw that process as an expansion both healthy and workable, and they believed that it would strengthen our democracy. Through the years, however, the admission of new states has been a very contentious process on both sides of the aisle. And there was a time in our history in the latter half of the 19th century when Republicans effected the admission of a number of new states in order to increase the numbers in the Senate. They accomplished that objective in some respects. In one noteworthy example, which I've just mentioned, Nevada in 1864, less than 10,000 people. The criteria at that point in time, theoretically, was 60,000. But it was ignored. It was ignored, 2 senators. That's what this issue is about. 2 senators. It is not about whether, on a principled basis, we ought to give to 712,000 of our citizens the right to be equally represented in the Congress of the United States. No, if they live here, we ask them to give up that right. That same process, as I mentioned, was repeated in the admission of North and South Dakota. They had hardly any people living there. They could hardly qualify if you put all the Dakota territory together, but what the Republicans did was, they were in charge at that point in time, they divided it, North and South Dakota. What happened? 2 extra senators. It wasn't about principle, about how many people, what the economic status was. It was about how many senators. When my friends across the aisle complained that this bill would lead to the election of 2 additional Democratic senators, so what? Is that the criteria? The political judgment of the citizens of some entity seeking to become a state? There's nothing in the Constitution about that. 0. It is the politics of it, I get it, but it is not the principle. I hope people vote on principle, that they believe that their fellow citizens who happen to live within this, used to be a square, but a square minus that to the south of the Potomac. This legislation is very different from the acts that admitted those states in the 19th century. It is different because it is based on the demonstrable need to provide representation to hundreds of thousands of Americans who deserve to have their voice heard in our democracy. And they have determined they want to be a part. Our founders were offended, indeed outraged, that they were forced to pay taxes but were afforded no representation in the body that set those taxes. Wouldn't all of us have been there at the Tea Party saying, you cannot tax us, England, without us having representation in the Parliament? I'm sure you've heard the argument from many people on this floor, I won't repeat them, about the level of taxation that is paid by the citizens of the District of Columbia. But they have no say in the level of those taxes, which so outraged our founders. Moreover, this legislation would end the unjust practice of treating D.C. residents differently than their fellow citizens in the 50 states when it comes to allocating resources or providing COVID-19 relief under the CARES Act last year. Mr. Speaker, when President Eisenhower, Republican president, but not a very partisan president, unlike today, where we have seen a very partisan president, no longer there. Mr. Speaker, when President Eisenhower addressed the question of admitting Hawaii, the principle is what Eisenhower articulated. And he said this: you have an economy that is self-supporting, there is a large population, and I would like to see the case handled clearly and specifically on its merits. By that metric, Washington, D.C. earned its right to statehood a long time ago. And today we can take a major step toward that goal when we pass this bill, which we passed last Congress as well. And as to retrocession again, I wonder if Nevada would like to be back to Utah or to Wyoming, to Colorado, or whether Wyoming, that has 200,000 less citizens approximately than the District of Columbia, would like to be subsumed by one of the surrounding states because of the few numbers. Vermont as well, which was taken from another state, as was West Virginia. Took Virginia, part of Virginia. I hope the Senate will then take up this bill when we pass it and consider the question of D.C. statehood on its merits, not on politics. Maybe that's too much to ask. Not on partisan this is not a partisan math problem or electoral predictions, which, as we have seen, may or may not come to pass, but on the merits alone, on the conviction that taxation without representation is not fair now as it was not fair in 1776. The people of this city, our nation's capital, deserve full and equal representation in Congress. Mr. Speaker, I hope that this bill will pass with bipartisan support. It's going to pass, but I hope we have some bipartisan support based upon the principle that every citizen in our country ought to enjoy the same representation in the Congress of the United States as every other citizen. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I must admit I'm a little disappointed in the remarks from the majority leader. When I saw him approach the podium, I thought he was going to give us a detailed explanation as to why he voted against this very bill in 1993. But instead, he lectures us on having the exact same position today that he had in 1993. The hypocrisy runs deep in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How is it unconstitutional? H.R. 51 violates our founders' intent, the actual writ of the Constitution, the land itself, which should rightfully be returned to Maryland if its original purpose as land for our nation's capital is discarded by Congress, and finally, the required repeal of the 23rd Amendment. I've explained these constitutional barriers for 2 years in committee, but there's more. D.C. does not perform many of the roles of a true state. A prime example, unlike every other state in the Union, D.C. is not responsible for its prison system. About 8,000 D.C. residents are inmates in federal prisons, and the federal government absorbs the huge expense. These are inmates who would normally be in a state prison, but D.C. only has the capacity to house inmates awaiting trial. 3 times in committee, I've offered an amendment that would transfer this normal state responsibility to D.C. My amendment was rejected by Democrats 3 times. So let's look at how D.C. has handled their inmates awaiting trial. According to the Washington Post, D.C. is essentially torturing these inmates with what experts say is mass solitary confinement. 23 hours a day of solitary for every D.C. inmate, ongoing for over 400 days. That is certainly a violation of the 8th Amendment. These are human beings awaiting final adjudication. Many will ultimately be found not guilty, yet they've been held in solitary confinement for 23 hours every day for over a year. Is this what we can expect from a D.C. state? D.C. is our nation's capital, was intended to be our nation's capital, and must remain our nation's capital. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, how much time remains on each side?
Gentlewoman from New York has 8.5 minutes. Gentleman from Kentucky has 16 minutes.
I reserve the time.
Gentlewoman reserves the time. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to revise and extend. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 51, the Washington, D.C. Admissions Act. In many respects, America seems to be at the same point we were in the 1930s and 1940s, calling for a single-party rule from Washington, D.C. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis at the time observed, "The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning, but without understanding." These words of wisdom might also offer some inspiration to us here today. Whenever a people or an institution forgets its hard beginnings, it is beginning to decay, by Carl Sandburg. Mr. Speaker, both of these sayings are on the halls of our Capitol. Addressing people's ability to vote is important. Addressing a party's desire for singular political control of a nation is another matter. Our Constitution outlines the process for admitting new states to the Union and rules regarding the formation of the District of Columbia. In 1961, 36 states voted to ratify the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution, ensuring that the District of Columbia had representation and taxation. That was done out of fairness. These 36 states did this out of fairness. We've already heard what the Attorney General Robert Kennedy said. But, Mr. Speaker, today we're doing the inconceivable and will produce the absurdity. Legislation does not overrule a constitutional amendment. Legislation is subject to the Constitution and all of its amendments. If you want to make D.C. a state, have a process that overturns the 23rd Amendment and then ratify a 29th Amendment, which then repeals the 23rd Amendment. This was done by this country during Prohibition. This is the standard by which we take care of the Constitution and the amendments thereon. Our system of government is predictable on the rule of law and following procedure, but today's bill abandons that procedure of amendments to the Constitution in favor of politics.
Time has expired.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas and Chair of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, Representative Al Green.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and still I rise, and today I rise with love of country at heart, and I rise to announce that I will not allow this issue to become so complicated that the American people might be confused. Because the truth is, we will be voting for one thing, whether we are for taxation without representation or whether we are against taxation without representation. It's really that simple. And as for me, I will be voting with the patriots. I will be voting with those patriots from 1773 who confronted the government. Those patriots who were there at the Boston Harbor. Those patriots who were there for the Boston Tea Party. I will be voting against taxation without representation. I believe that this is what the American Constitution and the American way is all about. Since 1773 it's been said, and today I will respect it with my vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this unconstitutional measure. Our founders debated the merits of statehood and a federal district and rightly concluded that no state should have supremacy over others and enjoy considerable benefits and influence of also being our national headquarters. Our founders got it right. This measure gets it wrong. If D.C. surrenders the special status of our federal district and instead becomes one of 51 equals, why should it enjoy all the benefits of also being the federal district? Perhaps federal agencies like Energy or USDA should move to places like West Texas, where we actually produce food and fuel for the nation and beyond. Ambitions on the political left to expand the Supreme Court and U.S. Senate seats limit the filibuster, keep 3 electoral votes for occupants of the White House, all while controlling our election law are one thing. They are for one thing: more power for them. Oppose this unconstitutional measure. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
The gentleman describes, as many on the other side, this is at a political issue, a power grab. He cites all these other political actions. But the real power grab is denying 712,000 tax-paying American citizens the right to vote. That's the power grab. This isn't about politics. It's a fundamental voting and civil rights issue. And it is outrageous that Republicans would play partisan politics just to block 712,000 Americans from having full equality in our democracy. Every American deserves a voice in their government. Taxation without representation, fundamental beliefs in our democracy. I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Kentucky. I rise in opposition to this latest attempt by the Democrats to increase their power at the expense of longstanding American traditions and the Constitution. Sadly, this is not at all surprising. Democrats have made it clear that American institutions don't stand in their way of advancing their political agenda at all costs. They want to pack the Supreme Court, eliminate election integrity, defund our police, keep our borders open, and prohibit debate in this very House. And D.C. statehood is just the next step. This legislation is an unconstitutional power grab designed to give Democrats more votes to pass their radical socialist agenda. As the Majority Leader just said, this is about 2 senators. It's not about principle. The District of Columbia has served as the federal district for over 200 years. The framers understood the importance of federal and state governments having separate authority and recognized that states would be ill-suited to house the federal government. And this was long before the Democrats started making everything about race. Now Democrats want to disregard the founders' vision, again, in order to grab 2 more votes in the Senate. Political advantage is no justification for policy that disregards precedent and the Constitution, and therefore I oppose this bill. And I yield my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute and a half to the gentleman from Virginia, Chair of the Joint Economic Committee, Congressman Don Beyer.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 51 and D.C. statehood. My mother and father met at D.C.'s Western High School in the 1940s before my father went off to West Point and Korea. I was raised in the Potomac Palisades of Washington and went to high school a few blocks from the Capitol. My grandchildren are 5th-generation Washingtonians, and through the generations we've been confounded and confused that the United States citizens who live in the District of Columbia have been denied self-rule. The right to self-determination is the defining principle on which this nation was founded, and yet this very right is denied to those who reside in our nation's capital. Taxation without representation sparked our own war of independence from Great Britain. Today, the same cry for democracy, impressed on every D.C. license plate, calls out for the peaceful passage of H.R. 51. The American citizens of the District of Columbia overwhelmingly support statehood, passing a statehood referendum with 85% support in 2016. My Republican statehood opponents argue that statehood should be denied D.C. because it is too small, because it is not rural enough, because it has insufficient logging, manufacturing, agriculture, or mining, because it is not well-rounded, and because its residents are not real Americans. D.C. does, by the way, have a Tesla car dealership. The real reason my Republican friends oppose statehood is that they disagree with the political views of today's Washingtonians. But this is terrible short-term thinking. Texas voted Democratic for generations, while California and New York have elected many Republican governors and senators. Political pendulums swing both ways. But this view betrays our democratic principles upon which our nation is founded. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am opposed to D.C. statehood, but I am not opposed to suffrage. If your goal is truly suffrage, rather than increasing Democratic control of the Senate, boy, do I have a plan for you. My bill would reunite the residential areas of the district with Maryland, as was done with Virginia in 1847. This plan would give full voting rights that we have heard so much about this morning, without ignoring the Constitution or the practical realities of what constitutes a state. And so I say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, if your goal is truly suffrage, then let's do this together. Let's set aside the divisive rhetoric we have heard and work together to craft an appropriate and bipartisan solution to give representation to the people of D.C. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
1 minute. 2? 1 minute, yeah. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was good to hear the majority leader say this is about politics. We knew that. But for some of us, it is about principle. And if it were about taxation without representation, I would have a slew of Democrats co-sponsoring the bill I've been filing for many terms to eliminate federal income tax in the District of Columbia. But I was told years ago, we're not going to join in with your bill because it'll weaken our chance to get a representative full voting from D.C. That's what this has been about. For some of us, principle is a big deal. When the Bush Justice Department was violating constitutional rights, some Republicans got furious. When the Obama administration did that, they circled the wagons and protected. This is about principle for some of us, and we got a tiny taste when the mayor of D.C., of an opposite party of President Trump, wasn't sure she was going to provide the police to protect the White House. This is about the Constitution and principle. Vote against this.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire about the remaining time on both sides?
Gentlewoman has 5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Kentucky has 10 minutes remaining.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentle lady from Michigan and chairwoman of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology Subcommittee on Research Technology, Haley Stevens.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 51 in the esteemed tradition, the responsibility that we have of legislators of this body to evaluate adding a 51st state to this union, to form a more perfect union, yes, in the tradition and in the written words of our Constitution, because as when my native Michigan became the 26th state in 1837, added to this union, the president recognized that we will admit Michigan on equal footing. But we know that the founders and the originators of our beautiful nation did not know a Michigan when they were writing our Constitution. They did not know a Wyoming. And so we ask ourselves here as the ambassadors of democracy, what message we send to the world when we deny over 700,000 people the right to vote, when we tax them without the proper representation. This, my friends, is an exciting and profound and welcome day in this body that deserves debate, and this legislation deserves to pass. Thank you, and I yield back.
Yields back. Gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you.
I'm amazed at the smoke and mirrors and fog of obfuscation surrounding the debate on this bill. What Republicans are doing here today is defending the Constitution, what was put in place by the founders, that Washington, D.C., the district, would not be part of a state where it could be coerced or leveraged by a state to get things from it. I've just heard in the last few minutes solutions offered by two of my colleagues that could probably be passed in 6 weeks or less to allow what it is they claim they're saying for the citizens of Washington, D.C. Folding those 700,000 residents through a Maryland retrocession, as has happened with Virginia in 1846, would accomplish the goal of the same type of representation they're talking about. No, the politics is over on that side of the aisle because they have turned down a constitutional solution that this would be, instead for an unconstitutional one that flies in the face and produces a 66 square mile state that is 1/18 the size of Rhode Island, with the population just a little bit larger than the city of Fresno, California, because they want to accomplish a political goal while we defend the Constitution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris. I'm sorry.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I guess it's appropriate for someone from Maryland to speak on this issue because this is Maryland's land we're talking about. This land was given for the purpose of a federal enclave by Maryland. How dare the Congress take Maryland's land from it? That's not why it was given. But, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the unconstitutional. Well, you have heard about the unconstitutionality. We don't need to talk about it anymore. I urge everyone who's watching us on C-SPAN today, go get your copy of the Constitution. It's written in black and white. This is very plain. This is clearly unconstitutional. But, Mr. Speaker, I hope America was paying attention to the majority leader's speech. That one line where he said, this is all about politics. In fact, he even gave the history. He said, well, in the past, the Republicans wanted senators and so wanted senators, so they made. We don't live in the past. We live in the present. Mr. Speaker, is this what America wants? Do they want pure politics? That's what not my words. That's what the majority leader said. This is all about politics. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's ask, why did our founders do what they did? Every American who's watching, think about what you saw last summer. You saw a White House under siege. You saw a mob. And we know members of this House have promoted mobs. They did it last weekend. It'll happen again. If we put the boundary next to the federal buildings, it'll be subject to a mob controlled by a state, not a federal enclave. That is the last thing this country needs. It's the last thing the federal government needs. I see my colleagues on the other side of that shaking their head. How else would one describe that group outside the White House? It was an uncontrolled mob. Thank God that federal troops were allowed to be there, federal forces, federal law enforcement, to stop that mob. That's why we need the District of Columbia to be the federal enclave. I oppose the bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from the great state of New York, Congressman Mondale Jones.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I have had enough of my colleagues' racist insinuations that somehow the people of Washington, D.C. are incapable or even unworthy of our democracy. One Senate Republican said that D.C. wouldn't be a, quote, well-rounded working class state. I had no idea there were so many syllables in the word white. One of my House Republican colleagues said that D.C. shouldn't be a state because the district doesn't have a landfill. My goodness, with all the racist trash my colleagues have brought to this debate, I can see why they're worried about having a place to put it. The truth is, there is no good faith argument for disenfranchising over 700,000 people, Mr. Speaker, most of whom are people of color.
Was that?
Gentleman's time was not timely.
Mr. Speaker, point
demand
of
was
order.
not timely. The gentleman from New York will proceed.
The rules say make the point of order when the words need to be taken.
He has to be recognized, Mr. Speaker. We understand parliamentary procedure.
The debate has proceeded and the ban was not timely. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
The truth is, there is no good faith argument for disenfranchising.
Does the gentleman from consent to withdraw his words?
Does the gentleman from New York ask for unanimous consent to withdraw the words?
Mr. Speaker, that's fine. You have my consent to withdraw.
Gentleman withdraws his words. Debate is going to continue. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, there is no good faith argument for disenfranchising over 700,000 people, most of whom are people of color. These desperate objections are about fear. Fear that in D.C. their white supremacist politics will no longer play. Fear that soon enough white supremacist politics won't work anywhere in America. Fear that if they don't rig our democracy, they will not win. Today, Democrats are standing up for a multiracial democracy, to democratize all 51 states in this country. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Woman from New York is reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. D.C. statehood is unconstitutional. Both Republican and Democrat administrations of the past have long interpreted the Constitution in that fashion. One of the problems with D.C. statehood is that two states, my home state of Virginia and Maryland, gave land for the seat of government, and they did not do so with the intent to create a new state. When Virginia's land wasn't used for the seat of government, Congress ceded it back to Virginia. It did not create a new state. As it was then, retrocession is our best course of action today. Shrinking the seat of government, which is permitted by Article 1, and returning the rest to Maryland for the purposes of representation, offers D.C. residents a voice in the federal legislative branch and keeps faith with Maryland's original cession of land for D.C. It also works within the bounds of the Constitution. Now, I've introduced a bill, and it's later going to be a motion to recommit, and I have also taken great care as a part of that to make sure that retrocession and the transfer of administrative functions from D.C. to Maryland run as smoothly as possible. If you're worried about the details of D.C. government, this bill, this motion to recommit, takes care of them. As the old Prego commercials say, it's in there. Congressional representation,